Grey seals in the Ythan Estuary, investigating the maternal vocal behaviours displayed by grey seals.
Hello, welcome to Newbury Beach. Here we are observing seal behaviour. Hope you enjoy our presentation.
We decided to investigate grey seals at River Ythan. We chose this species as they're well known to Aberdeen and display multiple behaviours. Due to the time of year, we knew that the seals would have young pups. In Scotland, the grey seals mate between November and December, with a gestation period lasting around 11 months. Therefore, the pups that we investigated were roughly 3 months old. Upon our visit, we examined many behaviours the seals were exhibiting, but we were most intrigued with the mother-to-pup interaction. The seals were constantly making vocal calls which we discovered to be between mother and pup. Therefore, we decided to investigate this further. Why were they calling to each other? What mechanisms drove this behaviour? And how did they learn to do this?
After our decision to study seal behaviour and our observations at Newbury Beach, we split up the sections of our presentation and research evenly. I produced our methods and will go on to explain our results. The mechanisms of behaviour was researched by Emma and Katie, and the ontogeny was investigated by Katie and Alice. Finally, the phylogeny was researched by Kelly, and Robert took on investigating the adaptive significance. So on Wednesday the 16th of February, about 9 a.m, our group headed to Newbury Beach to observe the behaviour of the seals living on the nature reserve there. As the area and the seals were protected, and to avoid disturbing the seals, people are only allowed to observe from the other side of the water, as shown in the photo. So although we were close enough to observe most behaviours, it was sometimes difficult to see everything occurring within the group. We also battled some pretty rough weather conditions, with storm Eunice approaching Aberdeen and the Shire with high winds and low temperatures. As a result of the weather conditions, we only observed behaviour for around an hour. Although this is a relatively short period of time, we observed a lot of behaviour types. On the left is a photo of Robert trying to get the best angle of the seals to add the photos shown in our presentation. On the right you can see the choppy water conditions and the sand blowing across the beach. The original ethogram that we created before attending was rather basic, and as a result of the varied behaviour we observed, we updated our ethogram as we watched the seals. As you can see, there was many different types of behaviours that were recorded. The timing of our visit meant that the tide was moving in as we watched the seals. The low tide was around 7 a.m. and the high tide came at 11. It was clear that as the tide moved in, the seals moved to follow the shoreline. This is an advantageous behaviour, as it meant that the seals were always close to their food source and could easily move between the sand and the sea. Interestingly, the seals were very aware of our presence and often swam close by to see what we were doing. Unfortunately, we could never quite get our cameras out in time to catch a photo of them up close. We also observed that when mothers moved, the pups often followed them, which is an innate behaviour of the pups to stay close to their mother where it's safe. We took a further interest into the vocal behaviours between the seals, and in particular between the mother and pup, which became the foundation of our project. So this slide just shows the definitions of all of the behaviours outlined in the ethogram.
Seals learn different auditory cues is greatly understudied, as most research is focused on more accessible birds and primates. To be able to understand this behaviour a bit better, we should look at brain morphology. Using MRIs, a study produced a guide of the grey seal pup's brain. This revealed that the seal pup's cerebellum, which is responsible for learning and cognition, was larger compared to the rest of the brain, taking up approximately 15% of the total volume. In contrast, a human cerebellum takes up around 10%, whereas dolphins, which independently evolved from seals, take up a similar 15%. It suggested this is to aid in echolocation abilities as well as processing sounds. The MRI also found that the neocortex, which aids in perception and language, showed the same structure as humans, and the expression of the FOXP2 gene, which is involved in motor and vocal learning and human speech. People tend to have the same approach to vocalization with similar anatomy. The first step is a large pressure of air is produced in the lower vocal tract. As the air passes through the glottis, the sound is produced by the vibration of the vocal cords. This sound is then modified by the shape and length of the upper vocal tract. A study compared the laryngeal anatomy of dogs and bears to grey seals, and they were found to be very similar, as they are phylogenetically close. The grey seal vocal cords sit perpendicular to the airflow, which is slightly different to some of the other seals, where they sit to the front of the larynx. This is seen in hippos and whales.
Abduction and adduction of the vocal cords, which is key for vocal production, is accomplished by two populations of motor neurons within the nucleus abagus, a large group of neurons within the medullary reticular, with three main parts: the compact formation where the neurons innervate the esophagus, the semi-compact formation where the neurons innervate the pharynx and the muscles of the larynx, which are innervated by the laryngeal nerve, and finally the sparse formation where the neurons innervate the laryngeal muscles. The starting point for voluntary vocal production in the brain is the laryngeal motor cortex, a structure present in most mammals and is a specialized region of the ventral primary motor cortex. This leads to pontomedullary structures which generate laryngeal motor patterns necessary for vocal emission.
The pinnipeds are one of the only mammals with cetacean, bats, elephant, and human to have a clear vocal production learning capability. This means that they are capable of modifying the structure of their vocalization as a result of hearing those of conspecific or sometimes other species. They start learning from the first day, listening to other and recreating the sounds. There are a lot of difference between individuals, as some are highly vocal and others more silent. Gray seals mostly learn the pup calls by being around other pups and listening to their calls, which is defined as horizontal cultural transmission. Their first calls are directed to the mother, which stays with them for 2 to 3 weeks. Most of the frequency recorded on pup seal disappear when the pup get older. Pup calls are completely absent from the repertoire of adult seals, which means that these calls are specific for the mother and other pup communication. It was demonstrated that the more the pup calls were developed through the first week, the more the adult seal repertoire was developed. Pups need to be influenced and be around other pups to have better communication with other seals later in life. An adult pup, for example, will therefore have a problem for mating when he becomes an adult. It was demonstrated that the mother tends to be aggressive toward non-filial pups, but recent studies found that it's not the case for every colony. For some colonies of gray seals, mothers responded as much to vocalization from their own pups as non-filial pups, and this was correlated with auto-suckling behavior. In other colonies, the mother only responded to the call of their own pup, which indicates that the vocals are part of vocal recognition. The work on development of vocal calls in seals is still underdeveloped and needs some further studies.
Finding research on the evolution of grey seal vocal calls between mother and pup proved difficult. This is because there hasn't been much research on the topic. There has only been research on the auditory mechanisms of the primates and birds. However, recently there has been studies on the evolution of the seal vocal production learning. Scientists have found there may be a phylogenetic link between human verbal communication and the clade pinnipeds. The rhythmic abilities of pinnipeds are being compared to the speech of humans to try and understand if there's an evolutionary link between the two. The last common ancestor shared between the pinnipeds and humans was 65 million years ago. This has become of interest to scientists as pinnipeds are more closely related to humans than birds to humans. Furthermore, when grey seal larynx anatomy was compared to other seals, as well as animals from phylogenetically close groups such as dogs and black bear, semi-aquatic species like otters, hippos, and fully aquatic species like baleen and toothed whales, they were found to be very similar to most mammals.
This trait of mother-to-pup vocalization is essential to the survival of individual pups as well as the species as a whole. Grey seals are one of the few phosid species to breed in high-density colonies, with females leaving the pups alone to go and forage in the sea for several hours. It is crucial this vocal recognition develops before the mother and pup's first separation to allow females to return from the sea and identify their pup for suckling, or else pups could die of starvation. This is backed up by a study from 1998 which discovered around 20% of pup mortality was due to starvation. A study carried out in 2021 suggested that this vocal learning in grey seals may play a part in the development of their adult behaviours, and that these pup calls could be a byproduct of the early development of their adult vocal abilities. Such calls in adults may help to facilitate social interactions such as mate choice or individual recognition. But contrary to this, some studies suggest that vocal calls may just be a leftover trait from the seal's ancestors and not actually show a fitness advantage anymore. These ancestors would have bred on ice, so it was more difficult for returning mothers to identify their pups in harsh conditions.
Seals displayed multiple behaviours. We decided to investigate mother-to-pup interactions, observing innate behaviours such as pups following mothers. The mechanisms behind the communication between mother and pup has proven to be effective as it has remained unchanged as in present and is present in a lot of mammalian groups. Through research, it has become clear that the vocal recognition continues to develop throughout their lives and is advantageous for mating, social interactions, and identification. The evolutionary history of vocal recognition lacks research for grey seals, but the phylogenetic link between humans and seals could be the fundamental factor for future research. The communication between mother and pup is crucial for survival.
Overall, we found it difficult to identify whether they were grey or harbour seals, as we were observing them from about 75 metres away. We could also not distinguish which individual the calls originated from, whether it was mother or pup, so would need more research to distinguish each call. This closer research would be difficult at the Ythan Estuary, as it is a national nature reserve and protected area, so you cannot get into close proximity of the seals. This area is very picturesque, and we all recommend visiting if you have not been there before. It is only a 30-minute drive from the city centre, and it is so worth it to see the seals and other wildlife.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you found our research interesting.